We're at the end of the second section of the Tanya, and we're looking at revisiting the words of the Yanuka. The words of the Yanuka of when the Yanuka said, a person is a lamp, a person is God's lamp, and their body's the wick, and the flame of the lamp, that is the dwelling of the Shekhinah over their heads, and then the oil that causes the flame to cling to the wick and to burn beautifully, that is Torah and mitzvahs. The Yanuka said, well, or the Alter Rebbe is saying, the issue is, in the Torah, oil is often compared to Chokhmah. Oil is compared to Chokhmah. And so how is it that in this case, we're talking about Torah and mitzvahs, and yet most of the time oil is Chokhmah? So we want to resolve this question. And to resolve this question, we're exploring this idea that the Shekhinah could dwell over anything. That the Shekhinah could dwell over anything. So we learned if there's 10 people in a minyan, if there's one person learning Torah, if we hear about the temple and the Shekhinah dwelling there. There was this phenomenon that there was something more holy, more apparent. There was more of God there, whatever that meant. That was the Shekhinah dwelling. That was God's presence dwelling. And we've been asking this powerful question. God's everywhere and God's infinite. So how is there more God one place than another? If God's already everywhere, already infinite, that should be a done deal. The Shekhinah is everywhere. There's not, how can the Shekhinah dwell more one place or another? It's a good question. To answer the question, the Alter Rebbe said, let's look again, since the Yanuka is saying that a person is God's lamp, a person is also, here we go. Person is also, you want to lower the volume on that so we don't get an echo. A person is also in God's image. So when I look inside, I'm getting a little distorted map of the infinite, but still relates to the infinite. So let's look at that map again, and let's see how we can learn about the dwelling of the Shekhinah from how the soul relates to the body. Because in many ways, God's presence filling the universe is mapped out by how our soul fills our body and how our soul relates to our body. So let's look at that, and then we'll come back and maybe we'll understand this idea of the dwelling of the Shekhinah. Then the Alter Rebbe went through and described that there's...
Tell me again, a person is God's lamp.
Okay, a question to review that. So the initial model at the beginning of the section, chapter 35, the Yanuka in the Zohar, so the Yanuka was this child that was born with incredible spiritual vision and knowledge, said, a human is a lamp of God, and the components of a lamp are wick, oil, and flame. And so us as a lamp of God, the wick is my physical body, my hand that's moving, my mouth that's speaking, my eyes that are seeing, all that's the wick. The flame, that is, now that I'm studying some Torah, apparently there's something above me, so to speak, right? There's some kind of presence, some kind of connection with God that is over us right now. That's the flame, that's God's presence. And then the oil that's keeping that flame on the wick, that is Torah and mitzvahs. That's from chapter 35. So the more Torah I learn, the more good mitzvahs I do, the more clean oil I have, and that Shekhinah will dwell over my head, so to speak. And that was the model. Then we looked at the soul, and we said the soul has three facets in its flow into the body. The first is the soul's essence, and the soul's essence is completely simple in terms of it has no components, it has no complexity, it has no definition, right? Simple doesn't mean not elevated or smart or something like that. We're not using simple in the pejorative sense. We're using simple in the sense of something is simple when you can't conceive of an alternative, right? If any alternative is inconceivable, that makes a thing simple, right? 2 + 2 is 4. That's simple math. What makes it simple? If I have 2 and 2, I can't imagine anything other than 4, right? Anything else is inconceivable. 2 and 2 is just 4. That's simple. Doesn't mean the idea is a basic idea. The idea that A equals B is very complex, and you need abstract thinking to understand it. But Any alternative is incomprehensible. It makes it a simple idea. The soul is simple in that there is no parts, no definition. A soul is just a soul, right? My soul is itself, and anything else is incomprehensible. It's simple, it's one, it's what it is. So simple is be careful of the English definitions that we associate with that. Simple is a very lofty principle here.
Would a synonym pure work with that or no?
Yeah,
The soul is pure.
yeah. I mean, perhaps pure is good, but pure also connotes other things. So it's like pashut, right? It really does mean simple. Like simple is a good translation. It's just tricky. But yeah, pure, undefined. The second part is the revelation of the soul. That's now where the soul is flowing into different parts of my body, and each one has its capacity and is taking that power from the soul. So whereas the essence of the soul is everywhere equally and hidden equally, every part of my body is alive, but you can't see the soul with a microscope anywhere. The gilui, the part of the soul that is revealed, that actually does have 613 aspects. And my hand has the power of movement, my eye has the power of sight, and each part of my body receives its power from the components of that revelation of the soul. So 1 is essence, 2 is gilui, manifestation or revelation, and 3 is the brain, that's the center, or we'll call it, really 3 should be revelation, and this 2 should be the brain, it's the middle aspect, where the gilui, the revelation of the soul, is first manifest. So there has to be a transfer station where the entire revelation of the soul comes into the body, and from there, like light, it emanates to the other aspects of the body. So that is the brain. The brain is the first place where the entire gilui, the entire manifestation of the soul is revealed, and from there it goes to other parts of the body. Following? So we've gone through this now, but this is third class, so don't want to go too deep into that whole model, but that model should be familiar by now. By the time we're done the Tanya and on to the next text, we'll really remember this. All right, so we're top of 798.
Is a soul like a stem cell?
Is a soul like a stem cell?
In other
Because a
words-
stem cell can be anything and has
Exactly.
total potential. And then, yeah, if you want, that's a nice model. You could say a stem cell. The question is a soul like a stem cell? So let's look at this metaphor that you're proposing, right? A stem cell, let's call it simple. It has no definition. You don't know what kind of cell it is. It's not skin, it's not bone. It has the potential to be every cell. How much that potential is hidden inside it and you can't see it in the DNA, I'm not sure, right? But in a way, you could say, yeah, you don't know what it is. It's just a general cell that could be every cell. And then once it leaves being a stem cell, it starts to become other cells. Now it becomes this. So I like that.
Since we're talking about souls, that's the present God. Soul is the present God.
So the question was, that God breathed the soul into humanity through the nostrils and his breath. Yes, but I think that metaphor is going to confuse us because it's talking about different things. It's talking about like the creation of all souls to begin with. Now we're talking about how the soul relates to the body.
Is there an infinite amount of souls that can be created?
600,000.
This brings us far afield. So I mean, we could go into that. Yeah, let's go on with 51.
600,000 souls. I thought some souls go back up.
Okay, we're going to go into it. So the question is, are there an infinite number of souls that can be created? So God has infinite power to create. So God could create 6 million Jewish souls or 6 billion Jewish souls. God can create anything, right? We're told God created 600,000 Jewish souls. That's how many souls, but those are general souls. And each one is made up of 600,000 sparks. And I might be a spark in one general soul. So 600,000 times 600,000 is a lot, right? So that doesn't work with the population we're dealing with, but there's all kinds of ways that you can mix it. But if you include everything that exists, I mean, God has infinite capacity to create. So always the answer is yes, God could create infinite anything, including souls. But God didn't. God created 600,000 Jewish souls. We're on page 798. That's all right. שנגלה שם כללות החיות המתפשט ממנה, רק כוחותיה של כללות החיות מאירים ומתפשטים משם לכל עברי הגוף כדמיון האור המתפשט ומאיר מהשמש לחדרי חדרים. So let's go to, Susan, why don't you go ahead and start?
Since they are in the brain, the overall life force which flows from the soul is revealed. It is only the individual faculties of the overall life force which shine forth and radiate from there, the brain, to all the organs of the body, just as light radiates and shines from the sun into the innermost of rooms.
All right, so we have in this room, you can't see because I'm on a green screen, but the sun is shining through this big window. And if I were around the corner in the coat room, there's still some light getting in there, but it's less light. It's just a little bit of the light, right? And if I was in the bridal suite with the door open, I would also be getting some light in there. Sorry, we had Tron enter into the class. Remember the movie Tron? It can happen. It can happen. We're all right here. There's people in the class. There's people. So we're working it out. So this light can come in through a main window, and then it's going to shine into other aspects of the house, other rooms, other components. Same thing with this gilui, this revelation of the soul. It's all coming into the brain all at once. And then from there, like a big ray of light, it'll also shine into all the other rooms, and the other rooms are the other 613 parts of the body, internal organs, external organs, etc. And we talked about the heart, right? When I said, where does the soul come into the body? Some people pointed to their heart. Some people felt like that's an option. And so the Alter Rebbe recognizes the brain is the main center, but the heart is another kind of center. And maybe the heart gets its own revelation to the soul independent of the brain. It's a possibility, right? Because intuitively I get my brain controls my hand and knows what my hand is feeling. My brain controls my ear and is sensitive to what my ear is hearing. My heart, I'm not so sure. My heart does a thing, right? And sometimes the heart seems to do things on its own. Maybe it's got its own source. It says, "Avafilu halev mekabel mehamoach, v'lachen hamoach shlita alav betoldotav betoladeto kanizkar la'el." Go ahead, Eleanor.
Even the heart, which is a central organ from which all other organs receive vitality, the heart diffuses to all organs, receives its own vital force from the brain, which is why the brain naturally dominates the heart, as explained above.
So the Alter Rebbe says, no, to be clear, when it comes to the first gilu, the first revelation of the soul, with all the components and all the light for each of the organs, that does come first to the brain, and then the brain sends it to the heart. The brain sends it to the heart. Now the heart sends vitality to all the other organs. The heart is pumping blood and pumping energy. So part of what the heart receives is the ability to vitalize the rest of the body. And so that's why we relate to the heart as kind of a center for all of me and an emotional center. But all that, the vitality that's going to the body and the emotional intelligence that's happening in the heart, all that comes through the brain first. That's why in chapter 12, our main tool for being a Bainani, for controlling thought, speech, and action, such that we are always thinking, doing, and saying the optimal thing. The tool is that the mind rules the heart. Hamoach shalit al halev. Because if you want, if you want to make sure a stream is clean, you want to go to the head of the stream and clean that, so the whole stream is clean. If you're at the bottom of the stream and you try and clean it, well, you're not cleaning the upstream, right? So the further upstream you are, the more control you have over the whole stream. And same thing with consciousness. If you're aware that the source of all the light, all the soul's components is coming in through the brain, now I know, I want to deal with what's happening in the heart. Let's start with what's happening in the brain. And that is going to dictate and guide what's happening in the heart. Hamoach shalit halev. So it's not just a technique, it actually is based on the structure of how the soul flows into the body. Make sense?
Mhm.
Unmute.
Go ahead, do it again. This
Do it
is
again?
my best class on Facebook. I'm glad this isn't on Temple's website.
Are you sure
It's
now?
just, yeah.
Are you sure? In a truly similar manner, figuratively speaking, does the blessed Ein Sof fill all worlds so as to animate them.
I know you're hearing because I can hear it through your phone.
Bye.
So now, thank you. So now we're going back to the Nimshal, right? We have a metaphor for God flowing into the universe, which is a soul flowing into a human, because we're the lamp of God. Now we're going back to the Nimshal, to the original thing we're studying, and that is, it's exactly the same how the Ein Sof fills all the worlds to animate them. So the structure we now understand about how the soul is filling the body, we're now going to go back and look at how it is that this infinite light is flowing into the universe, and how it is that, on the one hand, it's everywhere completely, God's everywhere, and yet hidden everywhere. On the other hand, there's this phenomenon called the dwelling of the Shekhinah, and somehow God's presence is more one place than another. And as we said, there's a third component that we won't look into this chapter, and that is, what is the aspect of the universe that corresponds to the brain? Where is that transfer station where all the manifestation comes down at once and then goes to the rest of the universe, and each room gets its own light? Top of 799. B'chol olam yesh bruim le'en ketz v'taklit ribu rivavot minei madrigot malachim v'neshamot chulu. All right, who are we going with now? Is this going to work?
I'm coming.
Yeah, we're just going to do it.
Okay. And in each world, there are creatures without limit or end, myriads upon myriads of various grades of angels and souls and so on. And so too is the abundance of the worlds without end or limit, one higher than the other, and so on.
So now we're saying we want to know the God's creations actually are infinite. There's infinite worlds. There's 4 categories of worlds we've learned that we won't go through them, but each one has infinite worlds within it. And in each world, there's no limit or end to the myriads and myriads of angels and souls that are in those worlds, and each is higher than the other, and so on. Go ahead.
Well, I'm up. Now the core and essence of the blessed Ein Sof is the same in the higher and lower worlds, as in the example of the soul mentioned above, wherein the Alter Rebbe explained that the soul's core and essence is not divisible, and thus it cannot be said of it that it is found in the brain to a greater extent than it is found in the feet.
So we're going to do the same. We're going to explore the Ein Sof with the same categories, even though the Ein Sof is also indivisible, even more so. But we're going to explore the same categories of how it flows into the universe. The essence of the Ein Sof, you can't say it's more one place than another. Even though there's infinite worlds, every single one of those worlds, no matter how holy they are, no matter how lofty they are, the Ein Sof is just as hidden there as it is here. And even here in the physical world where I am, the Ein Sof is right here just as much as in the lofty world. So the Ein Sof, the essence of the Ein Sof is everywhere all the time. At the same time, it's equally hidden everywhere. You can't say it's more in Atzilus, in the holiest of the categories of worlds, than it is here in the physical world. Yeah?
Well, I was going to ask you, when you say worlds, you're talking about Atzilus, Buria, Yetzirah,
Yeah. So when worlds doesn't mean a multi-universe with other physical universes. In Kabbalah, there's only one physical universe described. However, there are spiritual worlds above, so to speak, that physical world. They have names for different categories of them, and there's infinite of those worlds as well. So whenever, let's not define it, but yes, they're spiritual worlds. So that is just like the essence of the soul. It's everywhere in my body, enlivening it, but hidden equally everywhere. And the essence of God is everywhere in the physical and the spiritual worlds, but also hidden everywhere.
And as it is written in the Tikkunim, that he is hidden from all the hidden.
Right? So the higher worlds are hidden from us, but God's no more there than here. God's equally hidden in the higher worlds. So even the hidden worlds and these secret, high spiritual places that only a big tzaddik can elevate and have a glimpse of, God's hidden in those worlds too. And those angels don't see God any more than we do. They just see God's light. I want to do one more. Perush dafilu be'almin stimin dil ela hu satum v'ne'elam dechem kmo shehu satum v'ne'elam b'tachtonim.
This means to say that even in the higher hidden worlds, he is hidden and concealed within them, just as he is hidden and concealed in the lower worlds.
Right, so it makes that point. Ki leid machshavat tfisa ve'klal afilu be'olamot elyonim. Let's go back. I think we're now at the top of ours. Let's go back to Susan and then Eleanor and then Paula.
For no thought can apprehend him at all, even in the higher worlds. Let me go on.
Yeah, no matter how lofty an abstract being can be, even the highest archangels who have abstract intelligence, there is no capacity for any thought in any created world to grasp God at all. God is just completely beyond that, right? Just hidden from absolutely everything. Go ahead again, Susan.
And he is found, in other words, with regard to where God is to be found. Just as he is found there in the higher worlds, so is he to be found in the very lowest worlds.
Right, so that's the essence of God, equally hidden and also everywhere. You can't say there's nowhere that God isn't. Every universe, everything is just right in God's place. God's everywhere. But that is the essence. That is just like the essence of our soul that's everywhere in my body, but equally hidden. That's the essence of God. What about this manifestation of God? What about this gilui, this other light that's revealed, that's coming into the universe, that relates to the universe, right? We also have called it or mimale, the filling light, right? There's another aspect of God that does create a soul for a person, and a soul for a horse and a bird, and a soul for a mountain, and a soul for a tree. So that seems to have some light that does relate to the world. How would you find that? V'hevdel shebein olamot elyonim v'tachtonim hu mitzad hamshachat hachayut asher ein sof baruch hu mamshich u'meir b'vchinat gilui mehahelem. Go ahead, Eleanor.
The difference between the higher and lower worlds is with regard to the flow of vitality, which the blessed Ein Sof causes to flow and illuminate in a manner of revelation out of concealment.
Right. So there is a difference between the higher and the lower worlds, not in how hidden God is, not in whether God is there or not, but in God's light, in the manifestation of godliness. Now there is a difference where more the light is revealed in a higher world and more the light is concealed in a lower world. But that's not God's essence. That's just God's light. That's just this flow, like the light of the soul that comes out of the essence of the soul. This is just a package, so to speak, of light that comes out of God's essence. You can call it the Or Ein Sof. It's still infinite, but it has the capacity to create a filling light that will relate to the universe at different levels. And now you can say, okay, the physical world has none of this light. It's all gone. But the first spiritual world, right, Asiya, above the physical world, that has just a little bit of that light. So it's less hidden in that world. And that's why Olam, the Alter Rebbe, does it say it here? I forget. He's said before, Olam is related to Helem. It's the same language as Helem, as hidden. A world is defined by how much of that revelation of God's light is allowed in that world. If I screen more of that light, now by definition, I've created a different world, a lower world. And if I allow more of that light in, by definition, less hidden, I've created a higher world. That defines what a world is, but different from the essence. And interesting that we talk about this in terms of the brain. So I want to go back over a concept we looked at and connect it to some other things, because now that we're talking about the universe, it's interesting to see how this fits into a lot of our tradition in terms of the concept of what is a brain, a head. What's a head? So what's some of the things, if we're going to say Rosh, right? Rosh is your head. What's some of the popular concepts or terms in Hebrew, in Judaism that have the word Rosh in it?
Rosh Hashanah.
Rosh Hashanah, Rosh Hashanah. Head of the year, what else? Today is the head of the month, which is called
Rosh
Rosh
Chodesh.
Chodesh. By the way, a Rebbe, and we'll talk about it, this Shabbat is the yahrzeit of the last Chabad Rebbe, Menachem Mendel Schneerson, so the 3rd of Tammuz. And Rebbe is not just like a cute term for rabbi. Rebbe stands for Rosh B'nai Yisrael, head of the people of Israel. Right. So again, we have Rosh Hashanah, it's the head of the year. We have Rosh Chodesh, the head of the month. We have Rosh B'nai Yisrael, the head of the people of Israel. And Rosh Hashanah, you could have called it the beginning of the year, right? It could have been Tchilat Hashanah, right? And same thing with Rosh Chodesh. Why is that we specifically took that word head, right? And how can we call it just Shana Chadashah, New Year, right? It's not new. It's not beginning, like in English. It's not the new year. It's the head of the year. It relates to this. And remember, at the beginning of the chapter, we talked about how this concept of how God fills the world, it applies to all 3 dimensions of reality: space, time, and consciousness. Space, time, and consciousness. So the way the soul comes into the body through the brain in the head, that's the same way God is coming into the universe, and it's always through a head. And what is the difference? Rosh Hashanah is not just the start of when the new energy comes in for the next year, and then it all flows in. And just the beginning of that, of a year-long process. It's actually the same thing. It is like a brain. It's a head. And on Rosh Hashanah, the entire package comes down for the year. A whole delivery of every energy that the year will need, that later will become revealed like a light shining into a big room that goes into smaller rooms. Each day will get its energy, each hour get its energy, and each month also has its own little head that gets its energy on that first of the month. But it is just like this phenomenon. It is a head, because on Rosh Hashanah, we're not praying that 6 months from now or 8 months from now, I'm going to get good blessings and good energy. I'm actually praying to get it right now. On Rosh Hashanah, the whole thing is coming down. I'm saying, please, God, send me good income for the year. Send good health. Send peaceful time. Send healing for everyone. Please send it. And it's coming down right now. Boom, and it's there. It's just there in a spiritual form. And we have to wait for each packet, for each part of the year to be revealed when time gets to it. And same thing with world. That's with world and with time as well. Same thing with consciousness, with people. In Hasidus and in Kabbalah, we say it's not that there's a leader of the people of Israel. It's not that there's a highest soul. It's not that there's a king and a ruler. It is a Rebbe. It is a Rosh B'nai Israel. It's a head. And believe it or not, Kabbalah says in every generation, there's one person who's ultimately the head of that generation. And literally, it describes how all the life energy for all the people of that generation comes to that being, that person first. And from there shines out to everyone else, just like the model of my soul, just like the model of the year. Right? It's a little foreign to us. But that's why, if you look at how people will flock and line up, like the last Rebbe of this tradition, he was in his 80s and had all kinds of health problems, and he'd stand for hours while people that didn't know him would file by, thousands of people, to get like a quick blessing and $1. And they all said, standing in front of this person, you felt like it was just you and him alone in the world, and there was some holy thing that they all saw right away. Boom, just looking into his eyes. And it's because, certainly many people say in that time, all the energy for every person on earth was coming down through that one person first, and then was shining out to all of us. So imagine if you could stand in front of and look at the place where your own life energy was coming down and was flowing to you, you would suddenly be realigned in a different way. You'd say, wow, I'm not who I thought I was. I'm something else. I am a flow from this tzaddik.
One in each generation.
There's no, and we have arguments of who it is. Like every group says, like, my Rebbe is the head. My Rebbe is the head. Like, I'm not gonna pretend that there's not debates about like who the head of that generation is. But ultimately, every generation has one who is the head. Sometimes they could be a hidden tzaddik, sometimes they could be well-known. And you might have different groups saying, you know, well, my Rebbe is bigger than your Rebbe, and my Rebbe is holier than your Rebbe. And that happens all the time. But ultimately, you know, on the spiritual side, one of them is actually the head, and the others get their energy to in some sense through them.
So if you're not there in front of them, it still gets to you?
How does it get to you if you're not there in front of them? So what is a tzaddik? A tzaddik is not the physical body. A tzaddik is their Torah and their mitzvahs. So the Alter Rebbe said, if you want to connect with me and with all the Rebbes of Chabad, to the extent that they were the heads of that generation, you're doing it right now. You're looking right into their eyes. So that's how you do it. When you learn their Hasidus, you connect with them directly. So rest assured, all of us, if we wanna get into that flow, that's exactly what we're doing now, right? So, and even more so, because how much time we got? We'll talk about what it means to have a yard site and what happens to a soul like that after they pass on. Because in fact, we might think, oh, without that physical person and without that phenomenon of like hearing them speak and looking into their face, how can I really vibe with that? And Kabbalah says, no, now that they're passed, you can do it more easily. All right, but let's get to that after. I just wanted to point out, this idea of a head flows through all of Judaism. We've been saying Rosh Hashanah all our lives, right? We knew at the beginning of the year, it's a head, it's Rosh Hashanah. At the beginning of a month, it's Rosh, right? Even a Rebbe, it's their head. And so that's how godliness relates to the world, is the same way my soul relates to my body. It's through a head which receives everything. And I got some teeth gritting.
Does this supersede the Torah study?
Supersede? No, God, no. No.
You know, you get it. What if you're studying Torah? You're not accessing any light.
Well, no. So the question is, does this supersede Torah study? So if I understand correctly, if you're saying learning the teachings of a particular tzaddik, now that's different than learning Bereshit and just going through the week, learning Korach, right? So is it more important to learn Hasidus because you're connecting with a tzaddik? And if you just learn Korach, are you not connecting with a tzaddik? Right? So Torah is Torah. This,
you're connecting with God,
yeah.
Which seems to me supersedes this.
Yeah. So of course, learning Torah is learning Torah. This is only functioning to connect me with the tzaddik because it is a commentary on the Torah. Right? This whole book is a commentary on Ki karov elecha davar mod b'ficha levav kol hasato. So this is only pulling out of that connection to God that we get from the Torah.
So if you study the Torah, you've gone right to the source.
Yes, absolutely.
So I would say Torah supersedes.
I would never argue with someone that says Torah study supersedes anything, right? Of course, Torah study supersedes it. But you'd probably agree with me that if I just read that one line in Deuteronomy, for this thing is very near to you in your heart and your mouth to do it, and I learned the Rashi, and I learned the commentaries, and then I moved on, I'd be missing something about the Tanya, because the whole Tanya is just a interpretation of that one line, right? So I don't have a problem with either. Torah study connects you to God. Hasidus and Kabbalah connects you to a very lofty level of the Torah, but it's always Torah study. I mean, all of it is Torah study. Yeah, so you're just adding on. There's nothing has to replace anything. A little more. Perush, we're at 799 at the bottom.
Yeah.
800.
800.
Oh, we already turned the page. Oh, really? Nice. שזה אחד מהטעמים שההשפעה והמשכת החיות מכונה בשם אור על דרך משל. And let's go to back on our screen. Let's go to Eleanor and then Paula.
I did already.
You did. So Paula, you want to unmute? Here. There you go.
Where are we? And I'm on this.
Bottom of 800, which is one of the reasons.
Oops. See, I know I missed something.
I probably went on a little too long there.
Which is the nature and form of the.
No, bottom of 800.
Bottom of
is
800. Okay.
One of the reasons.
of, okay, by only by means of many garments. Is that where I am?
Do you have page 800?
I thought I did. Maybe I don't. I'm apparently missing something.
Okay, I'll do it for you, which is one of the reasons why the influence and flow of this vitality is figuratively called light. Right, and this relates to a shift that happened.
No, I
There's a
was,
term,
see,
pardon me?
I was actually ahead and not behind. So
I'm sure you were ahead of us. I have no doubt. Awesome, thank
ahead.
you. Okay, are you with us there now on 801? Great. So, which is one of the reasons there's a term shefa, flow, that was more common in previous literature. And in Kabbalah, there was this concept of or, light, that replaced the idea of shefa. And both work, right? You can say there's a flow that comes into the world. It's a flow of vitality. You can say there's light that's shining in the world, but what's the difference between shefa, flow, and light? And why did Kabbalah choose and pick light? The thing about shefa is if something is flowing to you, and you can see it in a teacher as the best example, right? I have a great teacher and I'm there to learn something, and there's something flowing from them to me. And part of that flow is they are adjusting their level of knowledge to my level of knowledge. They're saying, okay, how much does Smolash understand to this? Let me contract and put it in Smolash's terms. So they're involved with me. They're relating to me. They're adapting to me so that they can teach me. And if they don't, I'm not going to learn anything, right? If they teach at their level, I won't learn anything. Light, does light involve itself with what it's illuminating? Right? Does the sun consider whether it's shining on a wedding or on a garbage dump? Right? And the wedding gets a special light, carefully crafted, and the garbage dump is like just the leftover light. No, the sun's the sun, and the sun light comes from the sun. It's the nature of the sun to illuminate. So a luminary emits light just by its nature, not because it's involved with what it's illuminating. And the light just illuminates everything equally without let Susan back in, without having to be involved with what it's illuminating. And Kabbalah really prefers that term light because it does reflect that the Or Ein Sof, and especially God's essence, has not changed. It's just absolutely the same. And God just illuminates light, and what it's illuminating makes no difference. And from that perspective, we can say, well, if we sin, if we don't sin, it doesn't change God. What difference does it make, right? But this idea of shefa, of flow, is also important because there is an aspect of the light that relates to us, and that feels more like a flow. So those are just two concepts that are working here. L'chayot haolamot v'habrim shebahem. Let's go back to Rick in our room. Okay.
Okay, thereby animating the worlds and the creatures therein.
And you've delegated a what's it called? A proxy, your proxy reader. Right. So that flow, that shefa, we call it light, and it animates the worlds. She'ha'olamot helenim mekablim bivchinat gilui ketzat yoter me'atachtonim.
Marie, you want to go or you want me to go?
Oh.
Cindy's right there.
For the higher.
For the higher worlds receive this vitality and light in a somewhat more revealed form than do the lower.
So here again, we're seeing there's a little similarity. I have this packet that comes into my brain, and maybe the heart receives like emotions and vitality. Maybe there's more of that revelation of the light of my soul in the heart than in the toe, right? Certainly, there's more of that revelation in the brain than in my earlobe, right? And if I lost a chunk of my earlobe, I'm still functioning. Whereas, God forbid, I lose a chunk of my brain. Now the whole thing could be upside down, right? Yeah. So there. It's a tough world these days. And we'll finish with this. You're reading for yourself.
Oh, Cindy, read for me.
Go ahead.
And all creatures therein in the higher worlds receive the revealed aspect of vitality, albeit each according to its capacity and nature.
Yeah, so we'll pick up at 802, a couple more pages left in this chapter. But let's talk a little more about, so the last Rebbe of this system of Hasidus, of explaining Kabbalah and explaining the inner light in Kabbalah, was Menachem Mendel Schneerson. So you have the Alter Rebbe, and then there's 7 Rebbes in the system, the last one of which is Menachem Mendel Schneerson. His yard site is this Shabbat. So if there's one thing you could do, maybe open up any of these teachings and learn it this Shabbat. It's a good way to connect. And certainly if you give charity, maybe give a little extra charity with his name in mind and with that date in mind. But ultimately, what does this date mean? What does this date mean? It means if you're trying to improve your life with these teachings that we've been sharing, which is Chabad Hasidus, it's a form of Kabbalah, this is the time when the soul of the last teacher of the system, which is rising and rising and rising in heaven, like all tzaddikim, it comes closest to physical reality in its ebb and flow on that date. And the aspects of the soul of that teacher are most accessible to us on that date. They're always accessible, but like everything, there's an ebb and flow, right? We learned about Ratzah V'Shov in the last section. Everything that's alive, everything that's holy, everything that's spiritual has an ebb and flow, and it's like the moon, it's sometimes closer and sometimes further, right? The moon's not just in a stable orbit. Everything has a heartbeat. And like we said, we might think that a Rebbe or a tzaddik was more accessible in their lifetime because we're physical beings. We relate to the physical most. And if the physical being of the tzaddik is not here anymore, then how do I connect to them? If you look at how a soul is described in Kabbalah, the part of the tzaddik that we're trying to connect with is their ruach. It's their emotional aspects, their love of serving God, their awe of God, their dat, their knowledge, which comes through in the aspect of tiferet, if you've learned it. So those 3 aspects, chesed, gvur, tiferet, and dat as well, when the tzaddik was alive, you could access them by hearing the tzaddik's words or looking at the tzaddik's face or being in their presence. But that was only from a glimmer because it was contained in their body. The powerful emotions that a tzaddik feels, this ava b'tanugim that we've learned about, this love of delights that a tzaddik will feel. You could be next to a tzaddik and you could be inspired because they're burning with love for God and you just get swept up in it, or they teach you something beautiful, or they connect you with your essence and you're inspired. But that was all just the aspects of their soul flowing through their body. It was like talking through a bad walkie-talkie, right? It's like, yeah, I'm hearing a voice, but it's like, it's like, yeah, I get the message, I'm inspired, but it was hard for us to relate to their soul when it was in their physical body. Once they're out, now, in fact, the light of that soul is completely accessible because it's not having to be contained in the physical body. And we're taught that when we access the teachings of a tzaddik through their Torah, through their teachings, and also through doing mitzvahs that they suggested, now we actually have a better access to the light of their soul than they had when they were alive, a better access to their soul. And especially this Shabbat on Gimel Tammuz, on 3rd Tammuz, that's the prime time. So you'll have even people going to the gravesite, and there's all this Kabbalah about what happens with the actual stone on the gravesite and how the aspects of the soul are dwelling on that stone in the same way. It goes very deep, but it's considered a very good time. And, let me share one anecdote that happened with this Rebbe before we finish. We've been going, let's not do a meditation today. I'll finish with this. And that is, I know, the students of this teaching, often they're like around, out at the JCC asking people if they want to light candles or put on tefillin or do this. And it can be like, that strategy can be a little, I understand for some people kind of off-putting, right? Why are they in my face? Why are they doing this, right? So I want to talk a little about that strategy, where it came from, and maybe shed some light on it that has to do with the approach of this last Rebbe. And that is, before Menachem Mendel Schneerson became Rebbe of Chabad, nobody did that. Nobody did that. You wouldn't, if you were in a Jewish communal space, no one would come up to you and say, do you light Shabbos candles? Do you want to put on tefillin? Do you want to wave the lulav and etrog? Like that wasn't done. He pioneered it 100%. So this is in the 50s and 60s when it started. And this Rebbe said, instead of staying here and learning, and in fact, instead of staying in the vicinity where we're living, I want you to go other places. I'm sending you out to other communities. I want you to create opportunities for people to do mitzvahs and learn Torah, right? So whatever it looks like, and this started. And the Rebbe was recognized by everyone as being an incredible Torah genius, but beyond just about everything, every possible facet. I mean, there's so many stories, right? This is a guy that showed up in Germany before the war, and they didn't have smicha in Chabad because it wasn't a big deal, right? But he needed smicha to access the library in Germany. And so he went to the head rabbi of the Orthodox German community. He said, can you test me for smicha? I need to get to the library, like just that. And so the rabbi says, oh, okay, what should I test you on? Because normally there's so many topics, and you're you're expert in like one or maybe two topics. So test me in this, and then I can pass. And he says, that doesn't matter anything. So this is the guy, walks up to one of the greatest scholars in Europe and says, test me in anything. And so he says, okay. And he gave him a book of something he'd written on the most obscure topic in Torah, on the transfer of dead bodies from one grave to another, which nobody learns, right? And this is, he'd spent, years creating this, scholarly, examination of the halacha around that. He says, okay, tomorrow I'll come back. He spent the night reading it. He came back the next day and passed smicha with flying colors on this obscure topic, and gave him some notes about how he felt the ideas been put together, and maybe you missed this and that. So this is unbelievable genius. And also above that, a holy person that everybody who saw him just said, oh, you can learn about what it means for a person to be holy, for a person to be ahead of the generation, that holy light is coming to them first, and you can't describe it. This is just a holy person. So he was recognized as that, but a lot of the Orthodox community had a big problem with two things that he did. One of them was this campaign of sending Torah scholars and yeshiva students that should be spending time learning Torah, sending them out to deal with you and me and people that don't observe Shabbos and don't, that drive around and that eat whatever. And they're wasting their time not learning Torah, going out. And even more so, you're taking tefillin, a holy thing, and you're putting it on a Jew that doesn't care, that doesn't know. That's ridiculous, right? Why would you waste your time and scholars' times going out and relating to non-observant Jews that are quote unquote far from Judaism, that are not important, and you're putting holy things on them? It's crazy. They had a big problem with them. They actually took him to task. And the second problem they had with him was that he himself spent time with just regular people and seemed fascinated by them and interested in them, and would sit. He met with Bob Dylan. It wasn't well known, but he had many meetings with Bob Dylan, and very often just a normal Jewish person in the secular Jewish world would come to him, and he'd sit, he'd talk, and he'd exchange letters, and he'd be involved, and he really cared about them. I said, why are you wasting your time with people like that? You should be sitting with the brightest of the generation, the scholars, the holiest people. And why, if you're the big tzaddik, why are you spending so much time with just whoever, right? And he answered to them, the first question is the answer to the second question, right? The second question is the answer to the first question. So I'm getting confused, whichever. He said one or the other, right? If you don't understand that every Jew is important, that every Jew is infinitely important, and that every one of them is to me like my only child, then of course you're not going to understand why it is that I'm sending my students out to go give an opportunity, right? And okay, maybe to me it looks a little forward, like why are you telling me to put on tefillin? But the place it came from, he was bucking the entire Orthodox system. He was taking incredible criticism, and he was showing that he's okay with the students losing 5 hours of Torah learning if they can go out and find one person that seemingly is far from Judaism and get them to put on tefillin once, or get them to light Shabbos candles once, or get them to wave a lulav and etrog once. That's where his heart was. And to him, it was as if his only child, he had a chance to see them again, right? When that had been possible. How much would that mean to see them one more time? So much so that I'll finish with this. There was another anecdote of a very big donor like millions and millions, like what would be now a billionaire. This was a while ago. That was coming to the Rebbe, and he was talking about the stuff he was doing and the stuff he was working on and paying money for and efforts at bringing people who are far from Yiddishkeit, people who are far from Judaism, like teaching them something, bringing them closer. And the Rebbe looked at him and he knew right away he'd said the wrong thing. And the Rebbe said, basically, how can you know who's far from Yiddishkeit? How can you know who's far from God? Every Jew is a piece of God, and you can't look at anyone else and say, and this donor, and most of us in the communal world, if a donor comes and says something like, yes, wonderful, thank you, you're right, of course, so thank you for support. Like we won't take them to task. But the Rebbe had no compunction about saying, even to one of his biggest donors, you got it backwards, right? You can't look at anyone and say they're far from Yiddishkeit, because everyone is a spark, an actual spark of God, and everyone is one of God's children, and I see them as my only children. So careful how you talk about them, right? That was the Rebbe's approach. So God willing, this Shabbat, each of us can take that, a little bit of that for ourselves, learn some of this. Any mitzvah you do here at temple or in your life, do an extra one with him in mind, and we'll see. We'll be bringing a lot of light into the world, not just God's essence, but God's actual revealed light, palpably in real ways. So thanks, everybody. Thanks for the class. We'll sign off of Facebook. And
Thank you.
Next class. My pleasure. My pleasure.